Now, I'm delighted to introduce today's speaker, Wendy Strickland, project manager for the City of Toronto's Ravine strategy. Wendy has spent almost 2 decades working to engage community members, partners, and other stakeholders in learning about improving and protecting these special areas in Toronto, natural areas in Toronto. She holds a degree in botany and environmental science and master's of forest conservation, focusing on urban forestry, both from the University of Toronto. So let's all give a warm welcome to Wendy Strickland.
Thank you, Sinead. Happy to be here. That list of talks and walks is very exciting, especially I'm going to definitely tune in for that one on small spaces and biodiversity, because I think that's very pertinent to the city of Toronto. I'd love to hear what that professor is talking about. But thank you for having me here, and I'm going to start sharing my screen. I don't use Zoom very often for work, so bear with me if I'm a little slow. And okay, make sure we get it the right view. Okay. So I like to start all my talks about the ravine strategy with a map of the system, because when I talk to people about ravines, I find most people are familiar with their local ravine, but they may not get the extent of the system in Toronto. And you can see in this map, the ravines being sort of the Kelly green color, that ravines are kind of everywhere in the city of Toronto. They are the defining natural feature of the city. They are natural placemakers. They define the city, framing how and where it was built, and shaping distinct neighborhood identities. And like I said, you can really see that almost every part of the city is has a ravine near it. So just to give you some facts and figures about the size and magnitude of the system, almost 20% of Toronto's land area is actually ravine area. So that's about 11,000 hectares. They're sites of education, culture, recreation, and mobility. They contain over 1,500 public parks, plus dozens of recreation and community facilities, and hundreds of kilometers of trails that serve as vital transportation infrastructure. Almost a third of Torontonians live within a 500-meter of a ravine. So that's about a 10-minute walk. So you really speaks to that impact to the whole city that I was talking about that ravines have. They contain almost all of our environmentally significant areas, and those are really the gems of biodiversity of the city of Toronto. And the last thing I would like to point out is that almost half of the system is actually in private hands. So it's about a 60-40 split of public ownership to private ownership. And public ownership is a combination generally of the Conservation Authority as well as the City of Toronto. The private ownership is actually approximately 30,000 private addresses. So it really speaks to the importance of these sort of educational opportunities and engagement, and the role that that can play, along with the regulatory framework we have in place in the City of Toronto, to how ravines are managed and how they are impacted as a whole. This is probably comes as no surprise to the people on this call, because very, very knowledgeable audience that we have here today. But Toronto's ravines are really the gems, the way that the city safeguards our biodiversity. They are home to rare and endangered species. They contain most of our environmentally significant areas, and really they're the main part of Toronto's natural heritage system. They're also critical green infrastructure for the city. They play a significant role in how the city can help to tackle the climate crisis. They capture carbon, clean and cool the air, manage stormwater, and more. It's important to note, though, that the city was built around and through these spaces. So unlike parkland and natural areas of many other cities in North America, the Toronto's ravines contain quite a bit of critical gray infrastructure. So that's things like roads and bridges, but also things like rail lines, hydro corridors, and sanitary sewers and more that must be maintained and upgraded. So that really has an impact on these spaces. And in an increasingly dense city, the ravines serve as vital green spaces and community amenities. Ravines help keep our city healthy, offering opportunities for physical activity and providing significant mental health benefits. Together, they provide about or more than $800 million annually in ecological services for things like savings to the healthcare system through people being more active in these spaces, to the role that they play in climate resilience. Toronto's ravine system also provides significant placemaking opportunities to reflect the integral connection that continues today between Indigenous communities and Toronto's natural spaces and waterways. They provide access to land and water, which are essential to the well-being of Indigenous people. So, oh, there's a slide. Oh, there it is. Sorry about that. I went too far. So with all the importance of the ravines, we then have to recognize that there's quite a few challenges that our ravine systems are facing. So Toronto is the second fastest growing city in North America, and understanding how important these green spaces are to residents for physical and mental health. How do we balance the need to protect these spaces and steward these spaces with their access and use as a public space? Knowing that stakeholders can have various interests and visions for these spaces that can conflict. And I mentioned how ravines have a role in climate resilience, but as most of us that have been in ravines have seen, they are also really subject to the impacts of climate change, the big storms, the invasive species that come with climate change, as well as urban intensification that's happening on the adjacent tablelands. As I mentioned, 30,000 private addresses. So the coordination of multiple landowners and that high proportion of private land really can impact how the ravines are managed as a whole. And knowing that we have that critical gray infrastructure in these spaces, how do we coordinate that work? How do we pay for that work in a way that also is sensitive to the environment? And because the ravines cover the whole city of Toronto, basically, and every one of our designated neighborhood improvement areas, and those are our areas that have been identified as containing equity deserving communities. How do we ensure that there's an equitable distribution of assets and amenities through the whole system? And again, 11,000 hectares, so quite a big system. So recognizing that immense pressures from growth of the city and environmental factors like climate change, Toronto City Council adopted the Toronto Ravine Strategy in 2017. The strategy provides a coordinated vision and plan for managing the ravines through 20 actions based on 5 guiding principles: protect, invest, connect, partner, and celebrate. It identifies and prioritizes the actions and investments needed to balance protection and use of these special spaces. The actions and guiding principles are designed to address the challenges as well as the opportunities in the system and act as catalysts to move the strategic vision forward. And importantly, the strategy recognizes that communities are agents of change, that they're critical to the success of the strategy and the long-term protection of ravines. So really, people are a big part of the strategy. The strategy implements the official plan and supports and aligns other strategies and plans of the City of Toronto. And I bring this up because people often ask, like, well, how does it relate to the biodiversity strategy? How does it relate to the resilience strategy? There's quite a lot of overlap between a number of the strategic plans of the City of Toronto, but none of them kind of capture everything. It overlaps with nature and health, with trails and connections, as well as the importance of water flow. So I'm going to talk to you now about what we're doing through the City of Toronto to actually implement the ravine strategy based on some themes. So I'm going to talk a bit about how we've increased investment, both in restoration, as well as how we're investing around amenities for better ecological outcomes for the ravines. How we're creating new opportunities to connect people with the ravines and finding new ways to celebrate the spaces, and how we're working to improve how we work with others. So across the city, as well as with other levels of government and partner organizations. So as we were developing the Ravine strategy leading up into 2017, we did quite a bit of public consultation with various communities across the city. The two big things that we heard were concerns about invasive species and concerns about litter. So for those of you, I'm sure most of you on the call know, but just in case there are some that don't, um, invasive species are plants, animals, or microorganisms that have been introduced to an area, whether on purpose or accidentally. They grow aggressively, reproduce easily, and displace native species, change ecosystems, and damage habitat for wildlife. They're a problem in Toronto's ravines, but they're also a problem globally. This is every ecosystem in the world pretty much deals with invasive species. So as part of our 2020 report to City Council, we brought a motion that was supported by Council quite unanimously to actually double our investment in restoration and invasive species management. So it's around $4 million annually that we are able to spend on invasive species management and restoration. And when I talk to other staff in other cities, their minds are kind of just blown by the idea that we have that level of investment in this work. And Toronto takes a multi-pronged approach to managing these areas and to invasive species management through the work of staff, as well as contractors and volunteers. And staff work really is focused on the most sensitive areas. So a lot of the work goes towards the environmentally significant areas. And the reason for that is really they have specialized skills and specialized knowledge, so that they can do the work in the most sensitive sites to protect them as best as possible. We focus the work on contractors and volunteers on areas of more restoration rather than focusing on protection. So, you know, if an area had been previously mowed, for example, and we're trying to expand the boundaries of the forest cover for an area, that's where volunteer work is focused. So a multi-pronged approach to that. And since 2020, we've actually been able to manage over 2,100 hectares of natural area, including for invasive species. So just in the last 4 years. And like I said, the other thing that we heard was around litter. And litter, not only does it damage ecosystems, but it also can make areas feel very uncared for and unwelcoming, especially if you're not using these spaces right now. So through the report to council in 2020, we were actually able to create a dedicated ravine litter crew. So that's all they do every year is clean up ravine of litter and dumping. And since 2020, they have removed over 400 tons of garbage and recyclable metal from over 500 hectares of ravine land. So just in the last 4 years. And you can imagine the impact that has both to the ecosystems, but also to the communities near these areas and their interest in using the spaces. Another really interesting program, and if you're a plant nerd like me, and I'm sure there's a few on this call, this is kind of an exciting thing that the city has established that supports the Ravine strategy. It's the Tree Seed Diversity Program. So this is a partnership with Forest Ontario, where the city is working and Forest Ontario are working with certified seed collectors and local nursery plant partners to actually collect seed from our ravines and natural areas and growing them to the size that they can then be planted again in our spaces. So it's sort of like assisted propagation, not relying necessarily on just the seed falling and hoping that it with all the things that happen in ravines that the seed will take. And the reason this is really important is it enhances the genetic diversity and resiliency of ravines and natural areas by keeping the same genetic pool of plants there for wildlife. And we've actually already begun using these trees and shrubs from locally collected seed in our restoration projects this year. So it's a 10-year project, but we're already seeing some of the results from it. The other thing that we are doing through the Ravine strategy is developing ESA or environmentally significant area management plans. And what we're focusing on right now is creating a consistent approach to these plans and how they lay out management processes and roles and responsibilities. We will then phase in the actual site-specific plans over time with the order prepared by a prioritization tool that we're developing right now. We will be doing this spring, outreach to our treaty holders and urban Indigenous community members, as well as other stakeholders and the public. And then on the overall plan, and then we'll be doing site-specific consultation in the fall. So that's coming soon. So I'm going to move now to sort of the capital construction side of things from the operating side of things. One of the things that we did through the Ravine strategy is we actually identified 10 priority investment areas. So understanding we have over 11,000 hectares of land, how do we figure out what areas to focus on first? So through a council adopted prioritization framework, we identified these 10 areas. And the framework really was looking at, well, where are the opportunities and where are the challenges coming? So we looked at things like what areas have high existing ecological value. So those are our ESA areas where we know that there's sensitive species or that have been found or that reside in those spaces. And then we also looked at, well, where do we need to do capital construction? Where is it planned to maintain and upgrade that infrastructure that I talked about, that gray infrastructure? So there we have potentially a conflict, right? Where you have to go in and maintain those sewer lines, those roads, those bridges, but we know that there's sensitive spaces in there. So how can, there's potentially a conflict there. We then also looked at where areas were already being well used. So high levels of existing use, as well as where we knew through the development pipeline that there was adjacent population growth that was coming. So we knew these areas are important to people. There's going to be people in them, but we also know there's more people coming that are going to rely on these spaces as their parkland. Then we also looked at surrounding areas of need, so those neighborhood improvement areas, as well as areas that had little access to other green space. So some of those equity factors. And through a geospatial analysis of a whole bunch of data layers, we identified these 10 sites across the city. And then we had our consultant look at a very high level, what are the investments that are needed around enhancing access, restoring and protecting ecological features, and increasing resiliency within each of those 10 spaces to really bring them up to a better standard of care. And in our 2020 report, we identified, based on that analysis, that there was about $105 million worth of work that was needed in those spaces. And what we've been able to do over the last 4 years is actually reduce that to around 95 million. So still quite a bit of investment need, but in 4 years, we've been able to reduce it quite significantly. And I'm going to talk to you now about what we're doing to actually be able to do that. So this is where it gets kind of bureaucratic and maybe kind of boring, but I think it's really critical to our success on the Ravine strategies. One of the things that we're doing through this strategy is improving our internal processes. So coordinating our work across our divisions, our sort of areas of work better. And why that's important, this photo is a good example. So this is from the Highland just south of the Meadowway. The Highland is an example, is one space that we're kind of doing this improved coordination. So the Highland, to give you some background, is one of the only watersheds in the city of Toronto that's almost entirely located within our boundary. So it doesn't really go north of the city. But in the northern reaches, it has been pretty channelized. Instead of having a sort of a natural river system like you see here, you have a lot of concrete channels, that are mowed almost up to the edge. Just that was how the city was built in that area. But south of the 401, you have some of our gems of the Ravine system. Some areas that are quite spectacular in their beauty, but also really important from an ecological perspective as far as the amount of space that's there for our native species, as well as providing some specialized habitats. So the thing to also know about the Highland is that it actually contains a sanitary trunk sewer. So a sanitary trunk sewer is basically all of the sewage that comes from each of the houses gets combined into bigger and bigger pipes. And the one that brings the pipe that brings that sewage to the treatment plant is actually located below this river, so in the ravine. So we know with the growth of the city, and as all of us have seen, infrastructure needs to be upgraded in our local roads and that and the like. It also needs to be maintained and upgraded in our ravines, so that trunk sanitary sewer. The other thing about the Highland, and I'm not a geologist, so apologies if I get this sort of wrong, but from what I understand, the rock of the Highland, the base of the river is actually highly erodible. So with climate change and the big storms that are coming, what was happening, and it's happening in a number of our ravines across the city, is that we'd have these big storms that would erode the riverbed, that move the bedrock away and the riverbed away from the sanitary sewer, trunk sanitary sewer, and actually expose that pipe, that big pipe. And with that, you have the potential that these the trunk sewer, the pipe, the very large pipe, can actually become damaged and start leaking sewage into the water course, which would then enter Lake Ontario without being treated. So we definitely don't want that, because that's untreated sewage leaking into our drinking water source. So Toronto Water and the TRCA have to go in, well, Toronto Water in particular, have to go in and protect those trunk sanitary sewers. So that's not a question of if, but when. So through the approach we're taking through the ravine strategy is, we know that these repairs and upgrades are going to be needed. How can we coordinate our work? So across Toronto Water, Transportation Services, who deals with our roads and bridges, Parks, Forestry and Recreation, who deals with the natural environment side of things, as well as the trails and amenities for park users, as well as the TRCA that deal with erosion. How can we coordinate our work so that we have better outcomes for these spaces? So if Toronto Water has to go in and protect their infrastructure, can we sequence that work so that, and identify opportunities so that, for instance, can we build their access to their infrastructure in such a way that we can use that space as a trail? So there's not two, like an access point for Toronto Water and then a trail, 100 meters away, but can we combine it so there's one point of impact? Can we identify that work early enough so that we can actually do invasive species management of those sites before the construction begins, so that we can reduce the potential spread of invasive seed through the construction process? And then can we do the restoration? Can we coordinate it so that the restoration has better outcomes down the road? So that basically we're focusing the impact and coordinating the work so that ultimately the outcomes for the ravine are better. So it's kind of bureaucratic, but I think you can get the sense of how important that sort of approach is that we're trying to implement through the ravine strategy. All right, so, all right, keep forgetting I don't have that hooked up. The other thing that we're doing through the ravine strategy, and we've really had a champion in Deputy Mayor McKelvey, is that we are working with other levels of government to leverage the funding that we're spending on the ravine strategy to get additional funds to support the work. So we've actually, through that approach and through various funding sources, been able to raise essentially $26 million for various ravines across the city for things like improving access to ravines through trails and new wayfinding, as well as supporting ecological and wetland restoration. So that's in 4 years. So that's since 2020 that we've been able to raise that $26 million. The other thing, and as part of that, I mentioned wayfinding, and I'm going to spend a moment to talk about wayfinding because I think it's an interesting approach and a necessary approach for the city to take around our ravines. So for those of you that aren't familiar with this term, wayfinding is a network of signage and information that supports visitors in navigating these spaces. So parks, ravines, and trails. And we have just in the last few years, we developed a wayfinding strategy that you can see the different examples of what those signs could look like. So through that funding that we have from the federal and provincial government, we have over $1 million to actually plan and install wayfinding in a number of those priority investment areas, as well as some other, alongside some other projects where new trails are being constructed. And why wayfinding is important, and we heard this when we did some consultation with members of the BIPOC communities. So people who aren't traditionally using these spaces. And what we heard is that it can be kind of intimidating. If you think about a ravine, and I know most of you are probably very familiar with your local ravine. If you walk to the top of a ravine and there's a staircase or a trail, and it's probably forested, like trees all the way down to the bottom, and you can't actually see the bottom, you can't necessarily see where it goes from the point it reaches the bottom. If you're thinking about it from the perspective of someone who's not using that space, it's really intimidating. You don't know where that trail is going to go. You don't know what the trail is going to be like when you get down there, especially if you have accessibility needs or you want to bring small children. Is it paved? Is it steep? Is it narrow? Is it wide enough for, a stroller and a couple of kids? You don't know how far you have to go before you can get out. Do you have, can you walk 5 minutes and then find another exit point, or do you have to walk for 3 hours before you get your next exit point? So it can be kind of intimidating, like I said, to use a trail if you don't know what you're getting into. So through the funding that we've got to the federal government, we're actually able, like I said, able to implement this wayfinding. So it will be able to draw new people into these spaces for the physical and mental health benefits that come with that, as well as helping them navigate and stay on the trail. The next thing that we've been doing through the Ravine strategy since 2020 is we have actually created 2 complementary student internship programs to recognizing that, we want to engage youth as for the present and future health of the ravines, and understanding that internships really can be an important role in career development. So we have established these 2 programs with a focus on youth from underrepresented groups within arboriculture and urban forestry, including but not limited to women, non-binary people, Indigenous peoples, newcomers, 2S LGBTQ+ people, and racialized individuals. And both of the programs also prioritize the selection of youth from those neighborhood improvement areas I mentioned earlier. So we have one program that is called Young Ravine Leaders, which is a partnership with LEAF, which is a local nonprofit. And that program gives 20 youth per year the chance to learn about job opportunities and career development options and build connections with their communities, as well as with ravine leaders and experts. The city also partners with the Conservation Authority, the TRCA, to deliver the Ravine Youth Team, a paid summer internship program to engage youth in restoring Toronto's ravines. So it's for about 8 youth, 8 paid summer positions for youth annually, both crew members as well as crew leads. So it helps to develop some leadership skills. And that's for about 12 to 13 weeks every summer. And I jokingly say, like, I wish I could do this program because they have such an opportunity to learn about so many things that are happening in these spaces and all the different career opportunities that are out there. So the program aims to provide opportunities to learn about the ravines, develop job-related and professional skills, and learn about career opportunities in ravines and the natural environment, including with the City of Toronto and TRCA, while providing exposure to a variety of potential career paths within the industry and helping to build a sense of a professional network. And we've actually, we have a number of staff, a small number at this point, because it's only been running for a few years, but we've actually been able to bring some youth within who have come from these programs onto staff at the City of Toronto as well as at the TRCA. And I do want to, especially because this is a TFN event, I do want to acknowledge the great role that TFN has had in a number of the engagement programs we've started through the Ravine strategy, including this one. I know Ellen, as well as others, have provided some of the programming for especially the Young Ravine Leaders program. So thank you for that. And likewise, I know TFN has supported the next program I'm going to talk about, which is our Into the Ravines program. So the Into the Ravines program was again started in 2020. And it is a mix of microgrants, public education opportunities, and community-led programming, developed in partnership and led in partnership with Park People, which is a national charity. And the focus of this program is to connect people to ravines to create a deeper understanding of ravine ecology and the goals of the ravine strategy. It's a different approach than we have used traditionally around engaging people in ravines, because the City of Toronto, as you likely know, has for decades had volunteer stewardship programs and engagement programs. The interesting thing about this program is it's actually communities leading communities. So the program provides support through microgrants and through training to community members to engage their own communities in ways that are culturally appropriate while still providing opportunities to build knowledge and a sense of care and connection to the ravines. And the focus on this program is for people that have not visited ravines before or who experience barriers to accessing ravines, including those folks that live in neighborhood improvement areas. And through having this engagement, we know that we extend the benefits, the physical and mental health benefits that you have from access to nature to those communities. So it's a different approach, and it sort of expands on the way that we've traditionally done engagement to really have it a new way of getting communities to engage their community members to engage their own communities. Another interesting thing and exciting thing that we've done through the Ravine strategy is we actually have been fortunate to have been selected to have Toronto's inaugural artist in residence working on the Ravine on a piece to celebrate the ravines and the Ravine strategy. And they're actually, so we have the artist that was chosen is Maria Hupfield, who's a Toronto-based artist from Wisconsin First Nation. She's working directly with urban forestry staff to help her understand the challenges that our ravines experience, and as well as the opportunities and the wonderful things that are our ravines. And she will be installing a piece, as well as I believe there's the installation will be happening this spring, and as well I believe there's an activation, a sort of I'm not I'm not an artist, so I'm trying to remember the word. Like a performance piece. That's the word I'm looking for. A performance piece planned for the fall. So it's a way of engaging people again who may not be coming into these spaces in new ways by bringing art in. The last sort of initiative that I'll talk about is Ravine Days. So this was actually launched in 2018, and Ravine Days is an annual citywide celebration of Toronto's ravine system. So it's not just City of Toronto events, but it's events that are held through a variety of 20 plus partners that participate, hosting events in the same time, from things like talks and tours to markets and exhibitions. And I know TFN had it was a fantastic exhibit. I love seeing it in City Hall. You had your 100th anniversary photo exhibit at City Hall as part of as one of the Ravine Days events this last year. So last year it was September 30th to October 9th. It's always held in the fall, which is the favorite time. I'm glad, because it's my favorite time to spend in the ravines. But I forget, it's usually around the 2 weeks around Thanksgiving, and my colleague told me the new dates, but for 2024, I can't remember them exactly, but if you go to toronto.ca/Ravine Days, that will be updated shortly with the dates for 2024. And the last thing I'll talk about that I think is I'm very proud to announce is that the City of Toronto was selected as part, it's an acknowledgement of the work that we're doing through the Ravine strategy, but it's also an acknowledgement of the decades of work that the City of Toronto has done, along with our partners and partners in government, but also our community partners, is that we were selected by the United Nations Environment Program as a model city for ecological restoration. So we were handpicked to take part in this by the UNEP, United Nations Environment Program, to take part in this generation restoration project. So there are 19 cities in total. 8 of these cities are set to embark on an innovative pilot projects to restore their urban ecosystems. And then there's 11 role model cities, including Toronto, that will accompany and support these pilot cities as champions in restoration. This initiative is a contribution to the UN Decade of Ecosystem Restoration and the Global Biodiversity Framework. And part of why I was interested in the lecture you have coming up about the importance of small spaces in biodiversity is this particular program, as well as the Global Biodiversity Framework, really speaks to the importance of cities in global biodiversity. We know that the world is urbanizing. We know that the majority of people in the world now are living in urban centers. So how can cities contribute to our global biodiversity? And like I mentioned, this is an amazing recognition of the work of my colleagues at the city, but also the contributions of our partners and community champions. So to wrap up and the highlights of what we've been able to do so far. So since 2020, the Ravine strategy has achieved over 2,100 hectares of land restored, including for invasive species, 400 tons of garbage and metal removed from over 500 hectares of ravine land, over 100 students engaged through paid employment and training and mentorship programs, 200 outdoor and virtual events for Ravine Days, 20,000 plus participants in city and partner events and programs, and over $26 million raised from federal and provincial governments. And you can check out our website for more information on the stuff we're up to. And I'll stop sharing if I can figure out how to do that. There we go.
Thanks, Wendy. Oops, wrong box. So now for questions. We had some during the presentation in the chat, so I'll start with those first. When you put up that map of the 10 priority areas, there were small blue numbers next to the ravines. What do those mean?
Oh, okay. Yes, that's a good question. So we selected the 10 sites. Those blue numbers, we basically had to figure out how do we divide up the ravines so that we can figure out, well, what's considered a parcel of ravine. So we use some hydrologic modeling that we got from the TRCA to delineate 105 segments of ravines. So those little numbers that were beside were each of the 105 segments, I believe. Let me check my map. So that it's just a numbering for each of the segments, and then we went through that analysis for data that was divided up by those areas, and identified the 10 priorities.
Okay, thank you. The city printed a map of trails that has been out of print. Will it be reprinted, or will there be a PDF of individual trails made available, like the discovery walks?
It's a good question. I know that, to be honest, the best people that have data is our transportation services staff. And that's actually the best map, the most accurate map, as far as mapping of access points. My understanding,
that's the one that shows the bike trail system?
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
It's a more accurate map.
It's more accurate than the discovery maps.
Yeah, the discovery walks are sort of older. My understanding is we're kind of moving away from paper-based maps. So I don't know that there's a plan in the near future to update that trail map.
Okay,
But I can, if I can find out some information, I can share that with USAID, I guess,
sure.
or with TFN, and you can
Yeah,
share that
let
with
us
your.
know.
Okay.
Based on the city budget approved on February 14th, how much of it was for ravines?
Well, that's a very specific question. I would have to go. I know we have numbers. I just don't have them off the top of my head. Um, can I?
Yeah, you can let us know. We'll share it
Yeah,
later.
yeah. I don't know the specific numbers.
How are ravine initiatives publicized?
The best way to find out about the different initiatives that we're doing is through our social media. So we have Nature in the City, TO, I believe it is. That is our Facebook account. That's a forestry Facebook account, as well as the PFR Toronto account. Um, and the PFR Toronto has Instagram as well as LinkedIn. You can also go to toronto.ca/ravine strategy, where we do have all of the stuff that I talked about is in there, as well as links to some of the, like the Into the Ravines program, the Ravine Youth Team, those
Yeah,
things.
then you can also sign up for email newsletters too, still, right?
Yeah, so my colleagues that in our natural environment community programs group, they still have their Green Toronto account,
Yeah.
and they send event announcements, including if you want to participate in any sort of planting or stewardship programs. That's all those. So you can sign up for that, and I think you can email greentoronto@toronto.ca to get your name added to that list if you're not receiving those already. Thank you, Zane.
Okie dokie. Yeah, this is a favorite question of mine. How do we encourage better behavior in our ravines? Off-leash dogs, e-vehicles of sorts. So I'll tell everybody, I got passed in a ravine by someone on a powered unicycle using a leaf blower to push him along the trail. So it's getting crazy with some electrical stuff on trails. So the question is, how do we encourage better behavior?
Yeah, it's a common question. It's a hard one to come to an answer for. I will say my thinking, um, and I personally, and I think that the generally the approach of the city of Toronto is um, having people understand the value of these spaces, and the work that TFN does is great around this, um, and expanding who understands that these are great spaces and making sure that the programs that we do to get people into these spaces emphasizes the importance of etiquette, if you will. So staying on trails, keeping your dog on leash, not picking anything, not leaving anything behind. I think that sort of approach is the most successful. Um, and the sort of the pressure that comes from your fellow residents in saying, like, this is how we behave in these spaces. I think that sort of that social aspect of it is the most important, and ultimately in the end the way that we're going to have better etiquette in these spaces.
Yeah, I mean, I can speak a little bit to how TFN works with the city on that with regards to the stuff we've been doing about ethical behavior in nature and speaking to stewardship groups and potentially doing more outreach stuff with the city around that. You have to start with education and sort of then the community becomes much aware of that behavior and you get a sort of community of multiplier effect that helps sort of manage those areas. What are the 10 priority areas?
I can remember them off the top of my head. They're Upper Black Creek, Roundtree Mills, High Park, the Lower Don, Sunnybrook, Morningside Park, Lower Highland, Well, I'm missing a bunch. Lower Mimico. Let me look at my map. Which ones have I missed? Sorry. I should know them off the top of my head. Oh, where is that? I'm missing that one particular page. Sorry. There we go.
Yeah, you can send us
Oh,
the
yeah,
list
West
too, or we
Humber
can
is the other one.
West Humber, yeah.
Yeah. And Vale of Avoca, like Vale of Avoca.
Yeah. Oh, David
Moore Park
Balfour
Ravine.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, those are the ones. Sorry, forgot to.
Okay. Are all the plants grown for the planting program collected in Toronto? I think it's the seed program.
Yeah, the tree seed diversity, they're specifically that's a part of it. My understanding is they are all collected within our natural areas to propagate the plants that are already there. And the focus is on trees and shrubs. We're not doing herbaceous like wildflowers and that right now. It's trees and shrubs.
Okay. Will maps of ravine walks indicate which are accessible for people using mobility devices? I think that's related to the wayfinding program, probably.
Yes. So the wayfinding, the signage. So it's they would give details, and this is actually required under the Accessibility for Ontarians with Disabilities Act. They would give details about the surface. So is it paved? Is it like gravel? As well as information about the width of the trail and how steep it is. So it doesn't say, yes, it's accessible. No, it's not accessible. It gives you the information and lets you decide based on your comfort with those details, if it's accessible to you or not.
Okay. How do you connect with the Rouge Park? Are they promoting the park? I don't think the city does. I don't think
Yeah, so yeah, the Rouge National Urban Park is run by Parks Canada, so it's run through the federal government. They do participate, for instance, in Ravine Days. They contribute their programs to our Ravine Days events, but the Ravine strategy does not include the land that's managed by Parks Canada. There is a portion of the Rouge that is under city and TRCA management, but our programs don't extend into the Rouge because it's under management by the federal government.
Alrighty. One of the issues with the ravines are closures for water work or bridge work. Is there a strategy for disruptions and temporary reroutings?
It's something that we're working on. We don't have a solution yet, but I know my colleagues in transportation services have been trying to, and I have seen some notices at least of like, here's your workaround. So there'll be a map on the site that says, okay, here's your detour for this closure. I think where we're not quite yet is providing that in advance of the construction or having a digital platform to put it on. That I hopefully will come.
Yeah, and I mean, one of the things too with those, I mean, just talking about some of the work on the Dawn, like the water treatment stuff at Leslie and Shepherd, the mapping is like you probably could be extended to different access points where people get an understanding. So if they start further up the trail and then they get down there and realize they can't, connect to where the parking lot used to be accessible, that kind of stuff would probably be good. One question I had before we move to more chats is like currently the province is doing work on the 401 that impacts the Betty Sutherland Trail. TFN had a walk there yesterday for our members, so it's kind of fresh in my memory. So they're actually widening one of the bridges, and it's going to have massive impact on nature, like swallows nest around there and stuff. What's your level of interaction with the province when they're doing infrastructure work that would impact the ravine? We're for example, like they're including the size of the stormwater runoff from the highway, so you potentially have an increase in saltwater runoff through the city infrastructure that would go through wetlands into the Don. So like, how do you work in that sort of scenario?
That's a tricky one. as you can imagine. And in fact, I know I know we got very little notice that that trail
Yeah.
closure was happening, because uh, at- so the TRCA regulations would apply to that work.
Okay.
The city of Toronto, like their provincial stuff supersedes municipal stuff. So some of the regulations, like some of, and don't quote me on this because I'm not a bylaw expert, but my understanding is like we don't necessarily approve at the municipal level um, provincial works. So the highway. Um, I don't know that I have a good answer to that. I think that's
Yeah. So
there's
I
still
guess,
a lot of things, and similarly, some of the utilities that don't report to the province or to
yeah.
the municipality, they're a challenge. So the idea is right now we're getting our stuff coordinated and in order so that we're working holistically across the city in our different divisions, and then we hope to extend
Okay.
beyond that.
Yeah. Okay. That's good. That's kind of where I was going.
Yeah.
Um, roughly how much of the 26 million Ravine funding was contributed by the feds as compared to funding from the province?
It's the majority for sure is from the feds. I think it's, well, the 20 million of that is federal natural infrastructure fund. And then the remaining 6.2 was through the investing in ICIP, investing in Canadian infrastructure program. Um, and it was around active transportation. And I think that was a 80 federal, 20 provincial split. So I think it's 1.6 of that is provincial and the remaining or it's federal.
Okay. Um, Protect involves more than restoration and removal of invasive species. What steps are being taken to ensure that work done in or adjacent to ravines is respectful of the ecological health of the site?
So that we have the regulations in place around the Conservation Authority Act that's been changed or is being changed by the province. But we also have our Ravine and Natural Feature Protection Bylaw. Um, our own work is regulated under those two things. The Ravine bylaw as well as the Conservation Authorities Act. So the work that the City of Toronto does, whether it's for that sewer infrastructure work that I was talking about or trail building, it's still applicable. So that approach that I was talking about coordinating our capital work and doing that work in a way that's respectful of these spaces and has better outcomes. That's our approach is really following the regulations that are laid out through the bylaws and through the conservation authorities regulations, as well as doing the work that we around construction in a coordinated way. We also, through the Ravine strategy, are looking to, and through the ESA management plans that are being developed, are looking to develop best practices for our internal processes. So like it, providing guidance to how our park staff do their work in areas of near environmentally significant areas or
Okay.
in ESAs.
Trails with low use, as many in the north, can be multi-use. However, in dense areas, it's very dangerous to mix people walking and riding bicycles. Are there plans to separate cities like Minneapolis with best park and trail systems in the US separates all trails as children and older adults to get scared of faster riders? So I guess separate, bike only versus multi-use pedestrian trails. Are there any plans?
To my knowledge, not through the Ravine system. And I
Okay.
think part of that is just if you
Yeah,
look at
well, that would
the
have
width
big
of the
impact in the
impact.
ravines. Yeah,
Yeah,
multi-use.
yeah.
What ravine is displayed in your background? If that's for you, mine is the ravine going up to Belt Lane going up to Moore Park Ravine. Yours?
Mine, and I'm cheating a little bit because I
It's
just
not a
said it's the
ravine.
no, it is, but it's the
Okay,
Rouge.
the
So
Rouge.
it's not it's not actually covered by the Ravine strategy, but it's such a beautiful shot that I chose it today.
It was reported that management plans have been completed for a number of ESAs, including Glen Stewart and Hyde Park. How many have been completed so far, and are these publicly available?
I did pull those numbers because I thought I might get this question. Let me just find that. So we have a number of plans that have been developed over the years. The challenge that we find, so there's okay, 20 currently with management plans. And I don't have the list off the top of my head, but there are 20 that currently have 20 of, so there's 89 ESAs, 67 of those are under city management. 20 have management plans. That's not to say that the others are not being managed. We actually are managing, currently managing 56 of the ESAs. The challenge we have is that those management plans that we have were developed in on a case-by-case basis. So they're not consistent across the 20. So that's why we're developing this sort of strategy or framework for how the plans are being developed. Those 20 existing ones are not posted anywhere. They're internal sort of planning documents, but the new plans that we're developing, and this is part of the reason we're doing the consultation, then the idea with the new plans and the framework for how those will be developed is that there would be a public facing version of all of the new plans that would be coming.
Okay. Has the Humber treatment plant's treatment of its side slopes that were planted more than a decade ago recently cleared involved in the coordination work? I think this has to do when the Humber Bay master plan, they did some clearing. Is that, I don't know if
I
that
can't
would
speak
involve, to the Ravine strategy.
Yeah, that's not me specifically who does the coordination, so I can't speak specifically to that.
Okay.
My understanding though is that it would be covered through the, if it's ravine protected, it would be covered under the bylaw, and there would be some restoration that
would be done
required.
afterwards.
Yeah.
Ellen's got a comment. The big picture ravines map is would be a super helpful education tool for walk leaders in the ravines. If the city could print and share just a few very large maps, that would be very helpful.
I will see what I can do, Ellen.
Let's see. Over time, won't education be the best way to get people behaving more responsibly? Yes. If many people are near ravines, maybe there could be a program for school kids out in their local ravine and show and talk about what's there and how to respect it. Yeah, I think the program you're doing with park people, Ellen and myself have done walks and talks. I did a couple for Green Oma, who got funding through that. So young Muslim group that is looking to educate community, didn't know about ravines. So we did 2 with them last year. We're going to do some more. And we've been approached by others who are looking to leverage the expertise of some of our walk leaders and members to get them to understand the ravines. Yeah, I think education, there's a small percentage of people who are not going to listen, but predominantly people who care about these spaces, education is the way.
Yeah, TFN's been a great supporter, and I hope we're not overwhelming you, because we definitely suggest people, like, you guys have such vast expertise that we always say, if you're looking for, especially through that Into the Ravines program, that you guys are a great resource.
Yeah, I mean, we got lots of requests. I mean, sometimes it's just timing, right? So volunteer run organization, you got other stuff on the go, but we try not to turn them down when they come up, as they're great opportunities to educate, engage. It seems phase 1 of the East Don Trail is all but finished. When is it likely to be open? What is the expected time in phase 3?
Okay, so I know there's an East Don Trail website that would have some of those details. The East Don, I was involved
there's some of
early
it's
on
on
in
the city
planning.
and then some of it's on the TRCA site.
Yeah, it's my understanding it's getting some of those crossings across Metrolink. That's really the biggest challenge with all of those pieces. And I think phase 3 if I'm not mistaken, we actually have some funding through, that's one of the things that we're funding through that 26 million is implementation of phase 3. So that's from Eglinton to the section that just got completed.
People don't seem to change their ethical behavior if it's in a culture for years just by educational outreach. We count hundreds of off-leash dogs in sensitive ESA off-leash areas in Hyde Park every week. Yeah, Hyde Park's a disaster. We need to add another strategy. What are your thoughts on this? I'll address that quickly. Like off-leash dogs are a big problem. To be honest, TFN doesn't do a lot on that anymore. We're going after general audience education and get people who are not necessarily dog owners to understand that, and maybe you get more community impact. But what we do advise is and file a 311 report every time you see it, because 311 dictates how the city deploys resources. So, I mean, it's not worthwhile engaging a lot of these dog owners, especially the dog walking services that are walking with multiple dog off leads. So, I mean, we suggest to our members that they file reports. And I talk to a lot of bylaw officers, and they do get out. So I don't know what your thoughts are on that, Wendy.
Yeah, I would echo that. I think like 311 is one way to do it. As a dog owner who doesn't take her dog off leash in the ravines, I find it
We thank dog
challenging.
owners who have their dogs on
Yeah.
leash.
Yeah, it's challenging for dog owners too that want to be in those spaces without their dogs off leash, like with their dogs on leash. Like I don't want dogs approaching my dog. But I ultimately think, and maybe I'm an overly optimistic person, but I ultimately think that having people like a cultural shift around this is going to be a bigger change than the hard side of bylaw enforcement. But yeah, 311 is going to at least they track where they're getting complaints.
Yeah, they track it, and they have hired more staff and deployed resources based on that too in some areas. I don't know if you dealt with this one already, but what resources are being committed to develop the development of ESA management plans for the 10 priority areas?
So right now we have what is it? I think it's it's 200 now. 200,000 that we're doing towards the plan for the plans, so I'll call it.
Right.
And 2 site-specific plans, which are Taylor Creek and Wilkett Creek. And then we will be doing through that, creating that prioritization tool, as well as some costing for us to understand how much is it going to cost to develop these plans, and then get that into our budget. So right now the budget is just for the overall strategy around this, the prioritization tool, and those 2 site-specific ones.
Okay.
And then we'll build it into our budget.
What about the 40% that's private? Do you have anything to encourage owners to tend to their property consistent with city's policies?
We do actually. We have a resource. If you go to toronto.ca/ravine strategy, I don't have the full link offhand, but it is on there. We've created a property owner's guide to healthy ravines. So it gives you some guidance and some resources on how you can manage your ravine property in a way that is respectful of the ecology and the water management.
Yeah. Are leaders in your various programs being taught the importance of ravine users leaving plants? Yeah, this is about harvesting and foraging.
100%. And like I said, TFN helps with the some of that training. But for sure that not just leaving plants, but staying on trail, the sort of the etiquette side of things is definitely incorporated into all of our programs, to make sure that not only are people coming into these spaces, but they're coming into these spaces understanding how important they are, but also how sensitive they can be, and how we can interact with them in ways that are sustainable.
Okay. Will there be more notice for us as stakeholders to provide input on city department plans for the ravines before the plans are finalized. This used to be common, but has not happened as much in recent years.
I'm a little unclear. I'm assuming they mean capital plans?
Yeah,
like
possibly. I mean,
construction?
the strategy is already approved, and there was public engagement for when it was done, but
Yeah, yeah. Um, yeah, so as far as like next steps for the ravine strategy, there, other than specific projects, we're not planning an overall sort of engagement on the strategy itself. But there are, like I said, for the ESAs, there's consultation that'll be ESA management plans. There's consultation that will be coming up, as well as a number of site-specific sort of interventions, like when we do construction.
yeah. So on that, like, so you do, there is engagement when you're doing restoration planning, for example, right? Like, do you do, or like joint stuff with the TRCA, like the Scarborough Bluffs project that's going on right now? Is that an example of where you would, like, if it impacts a ravine, a project like that, would you would engage the public for feedback as well
Yes,
as stakeholder groups like us?
yeah, those large projects like that generally have either an environmental assessment process that's gone through, like any of our big trail construction projects,
Right.
as well our smaller projects. We generally have a smaller scale consultation that happens, and again, that's that sort of construction side of things.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay, what else? I'm looking for more questions. Will there be a ravine stakeholders group of non-city people created to oversee implementation of the strategy over time?
That isn't part of the plan at this point, to have an ongoing sort of community group created. Um, we always are welcome feedback, but that's not part of it. I mean, the strategy, the report we brought to council in 2020 was sort of our 10-year approach.
Right.
It's something I can consider for as we go through the
Yeah.
next one.
So, I mean, you know, like around Tommy with TRCA, they used to be a working group that involved a counselor, and we sat on it, and we're trying to get it restarted. We've been told from the Toronto Island Master Plan there'll be an ongoing working group with stakeholder groups. So it would be that, I think that could be mutually beneficial with regards to the ravines if your team considered establishing a working group that could engage with how you're going out and deploying the strategy.
Noted. Well, come back to my
Does the capital planning coordination committee have clout dealing with individual municipal agencies, or does it rely on moral persuasion? Sorry.
So we had actually council direction, which is very helpful in getting other divisions to participate. We had council direction. So other divisions within the City of Toronto, so that's Toronto Water, Transportation Services, ECS, I'm losing the construction services, solid waste. All of those folks are at the table. The municipal agencies are where are sort of our next step, because we don't have council direction around them. Right now with those, we rely on the authority under our regulatory processes, rather than the coordination. But we're hoping that's where that eventually goes.
Okay.
Like I said earlier, get our own work in order, and then move to those others.
We have no more questions in the chat, so unless there are no more any more questions, thank you, Wendy, very much, and please join us for our next lecture in April on climate change and the ravine system. Thank you, everybody, for attending. Thanks a lot, Wendy.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
It was terrific. Thank you so much, Wendy.
My pleasure. And have a great day, everyone.
Yeah, you too.